Really quick.
Yes, please do share, Alan.
Okay, I just did.
We tweeted at you as well. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Mint Press News live stream. I'm Minar Adley. I'm the founder and director of Mint Press News and Behind the Headlines. As many of you know, YouTube has recently demonetized our entire channel, so we'd greatly appreciate your support by becoming a member of our Patreon. This will help sustain our live streams. So today marks day 70 of Israel's onslaught against Gaza. It is a genocide. It is horrific to watch in real time the tragedies coming out of Gaza, the images coming out of Gaza every single day. And I know that I'm not the only person to say this, but I feel emotionally, mentally, physically exhausted. And I just cannot begin to imagine how people in Gaza are feeling every single day, having to live through this horror. It's like, a nightmare every single day. And just when you think that things could not get any worse, it's like every day when we get these updates and we follow what's happening, Israel is relentlessly targeting civilians in ways and torturing them in ways and just humiliating Palestinians in ways that you just could not think could have gotten any worse. And so to discuss this and more, we are joined by the very brilliant independent journalist, Abby Martin. Welcome, Abby. And we are also joined by Alan McLeod. Thank you guys for being here today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Great to be here again.
Yeah, so Abby, you have been doing a lot of really incredible coverage about Gaza. You've released a documentary, Gaza Fights for Freedom, and you've been one of the great Western voices leading the way in really breaking through the propaganda machine when it comes to the dehumanization of Palestinians that we see in corporate media. What has been your reaction as someone who has covered the region, has created this documentary a few years ago? What is your reaction now, this time around, with such horrific scenes coming out of Gaza?
I mean, it has been absolutely horrifying, Minar, as someone who has covered the conflict for over a decade, to see the genocidal bloodlust, I think, and to kind of harken back to the days just after 9/11, where you see this incitement, this genocidal incitement and bloodlust take root. And it makes me feel like we've learned nothing from the Iraq War, the complicity of the corporate media selling the lies that brought us into the Iraq War, which was the gravest atrocity in the modern era. And I would argue that this is similar, and we'll see where this goes. But it's the same thing. It's the same thing. And it just keeps getting worse because the more egregious Israel's crimes become and the more widespread, I mean, people are all watching this real time be live streamed in their devices, in their hands. And so it feels much more dystopian because during the Iraq War, of course, we all knew what was going on, but it really took something like WikiLeaks to expose how civilians were dying in mass. And, you look back at eras like Vietnam and Korea, and we kind of take stock looking at real history and unpacking, what really happened in these horrific, heinous war crimes. But this is happening real time. There are My massacres happening every day, right? There are Abu Ghraib's mass torture of these men, stripping down. We don't even know the scope and scale of what's happening because all the journalists are being targeted and killed. But just the images that we're seeing coming out of Gaza today is atrocious. It's despicable. It makes me sick to my stomach. And I look at the swath of corporate media reporters in just horror that how could they be reporting this? And how could they not be reporting what is actually going on? How could they not be calling out the complicity of their colleagues when the other colleagues that all should be like a journalist family, that we all have each other's backs, and they are getting targeted with targeted assassinations on the ground in Gaza by the dozens? I think, you just released a great video yesterday that the number is over 80. So it's beyond comprehension, honestly, that this is where we are, that the Western world is sitting back, allowing this to happen, facilitating it, giving more and more Hellfire missiles as we're seeing a genocide unfold in the most atrocious way.
It is really horrific. And you mentioned the journalists that are being targeted. I mean, like you said, yesterday I released a video breaking down how Israel has systematically targeted and they're systematically taking out journalists, one by one in Gaza. That number is now, I believe, over 85 people today. Israel even targeted Wa'el Dahdouh. He's the chief correspondent for Al Jazeera after they murdered his family. They targeted his home. His wife, his children, and even his grandchildren were massacred. And he has been left to be alive to tell their story and the horrific stories of all the Palestinians that are making it through Gaza today. And you'd think that corporate mainstream journalists, like you'd think this would be the top story in a country that purports that it is a democracy, a defender of our First Amendment, of free speech, of journalism. And yet they have said nothing. And if they have covered this in any way, both Alan and I have, mentioned that they pretend not to know where the missiles are coming from. They pretend not to know that, that Israel is systematically targeting them, even though the Israeli military itself has said that they will be taking out these journalists. And we have articles that have been written in the Times of Israel that have depicted the journalists in Gaza as extensions of Hamas. They've been completely dehumanized. So it really is just really disturbing to see this bloodlust for war, the dehumanization of Palestinians, the way that Hamas is portrayed, the way that Palestinians are portrayed in Gaza is very similar to the post 9/11 era that we grew up in. And it's really terrifying to know what this could mean for Muslims and Palestinians living in this country. I mean, we've already seen attacks against people, that 6-year-old child who was stabbed with his mother, these 3 young men who were targeted for wearing the kufiya.
Not enough for Bernie to call for a ceasefire happens right in his backyard. Still, did he call for a ceasefire like 2 days ago? What is going on?
No, he called for a humanitarian pause.
Oh, good.
He also locked his doors at his Senate office to prevent people from asking him.
Yeah, he doesn't want to be bothered. Oh, that's good. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're seeing. And so I want to talk about this video right here. I'm going to share the screen really quickly. 1 second. It really just goes to show the kind of wording, I guess you could say, the alarming statements that are made by people within the Israeli government who make fully clear their intent that this is genocide, in case the media needs any clarification that this is a genocide. So 1 second.
בעזה, כולם, בלי יוצא מן הכלל, מחבלים, בני כלבים, צריך למוטט אותם, להרוס אותם, מבחינתי, להרוג את כולם. לעשות את הכל אבק, צה"ל יפרז את השטח, ונתחיל לבנות שם אזורים חדשים, קודם כל למען ביטחוננו, ולכן...
All right, so we have this video where the intent is very clear that this is genocide. And I just want to share... that was a former Knesset member.
Right.
That's the thing, is there's dozens and dozens and dozens. So many that I can't even count them, of Israeli cabinet ministers, media officials, plainly and explicitly laying out their genocidal intent. And then when you couple that with the actual actions on the ground in Gaza, targeting civilian infrastructure where they know there's mass amounts of civilians sheltering, actual shelters of refugees, innocent civilians targeted intentionally, calling journalists on the phone and saying, stop what you're doing or we will kill you. That's genocide. When you couple the practice with the actual spoken intent, that is actual genocide. When you look at the articles of genocide, what lays bare what genocide is. And also the impossibility of survival when you cut off and besiege an enclave of 2.3 million people, deprive them of basic human necessities. That's collective punishment. That's also incorporated in the articles of genocide. So you have 3 clear things that are being carried out in broad daylight. And it is so insulting to our intelligence when you have Western leaders placating placating the American public. No, Israel's not targeting civilians. Meanwhile, you have Israeli officials saying, yeah, there's no innocent people in Gaza. Every single day, it's either an Israeli minister or like a headline of an Israeli newspaper saying, yeah, don't be naive. There's no innocent civilians in Gaza. Everyone is a human animal. We're going to act accordingly. How much more proof do you need? But this is just the point. When you have Western leaders, this is all propaganda for us. It is designed for American audiences because they rely on us for weapons and aid. And so Israeli officials aren't pretending to hide behind, democracy or human rights or anything like that. Israeli society knows full well what is going on, and they fully stand behind it.
Exactly. And I think, we're being gaslit every single day in the West with our politicians and our Western journalists pretending to not hear the statements made by people like this person that's a former Knesset member. And like you said, this is not the only video that exists. I mean, there are literally hundreds of videos like this that exist. And every single day they make their intent clear within Israeli media. It's no secret. They're not hiding behind it. The people who are lying to their public, to their citizens, are the Western governments, like the United States, like the countries of the EU, Rishi Sunak of Great Britain, because they're the ones who are handing Israel the very bombs to drop on Gaza. And to them, they don't see these as civilians. They just see all of the deaths as money-making mechanisms for the executives at Lockheed Martin and Raytheon and Boeing. That's all it really comes down to. And Alan, if I could just go to you about, where's the headline here? I'm losing my headline. We have a headline here, innocents in Gaza, don't be naive. Share. This one is, I know they just keep getting worse and worse and more blatant. But this is, obviously it's from the Times of Israel, but surprisingly, yesterday in our live stream, we shared another headline that was, I think, from the Wall Street Journal, where they were calling for, let's redefine the word genocide because it's being politicized, right? So Alan, talk to me about these headlines.
Yeah, well, we're 10 weeks into this onslaught, and I don't know about you, but I'm getting pretty sick, not just sick to my stomach of watching pictures and videos of babies being ripped apart, of mothers crying over their dead sons and their dead daughters. I'm also getting sick of listening to American politicians talking about Israel having a right to defend itself. I'm getting pretty sick of reading headlines and articles in mainstream outlets like the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Atlantic, written by some ghoul at a think tank who has his salary paid for by Lockheed Martin or Boeing or Raytheon, talking about how we have to keep the flow of arms to Israel going. I'm getting pretty sick of these sorts of headlines of Westerners in the West talking about how we need to redefine the word genocide or how there are no innocents in Gaza. And I'm also getting pretty sick of Western governments, particularly ones in Europe, pushing through draconian legislations, banning protests and undermining the very values that they always claim that they're fighting for in places like the Middle East, like Iraq, like Afghanistan, or in Ukraine today. I'm also getting pretty sick of American politicians talking about how we need humanitarian assistance to go to the people of Palestine, how they still stand with the people of Palestine, and at the same time voting for Biden's $14.5 billion Israeli aid package to go to the apartheid state, giving them weapons for free, $14.5 billion worth of weapons for free, so they can carry out this slaughter and continue it for many months to come. There was a clip that went viral recently of the Israeli defense minister talking to an American official, talking about how this war, as he called it, would go on for many, many months, for indefinite amount of time. This thing is potentially not even over. So yeah, I don't know about you, but I'm getting pretty sick of reading all of this. Let's remember, of course, that Gaza is one of the world's most densely populated places. There's more than 2 million people living in a small space that's actually smaller in size than Mobile, Alabama. Gaza has a higher population density than most big American cities like Chicago or Washington, D.C. And these people are getting targeted, not with the latest smart electronic super high, definition, all of this high tech missile stuff that's coming out of the likes of Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, but they're also getting targeted. There was a report that said nearly half of the bombs dropped on Gaza are dumb bombs, which are guided with nothing but gravity, meaning that, as the Israeli defense minister said, the emphasis is actually on damage rather than precision. In other words, they don't care about civilian casualties because, of course, this is not really a war against Hamas. This is an attempt to drive the population of Gaza out of their homes and out of their land into the Sinai desert, and from there, who knows where. But the point is that this is all about land. It's not about religion. It's not even about October 7th in essence. That was just merely the catalyst for Israel to go on a killing spree as they have done. So yeah, I'm getting pretty sick of all of this. And as to your point about the media, I'm also getting sick of reading headlines saying things like Israelis killed and Palestinians die. There was a recent one only a couple of days ago, I think, actually, as we're recording this, a famous Palestinian poet and writer was killed in an Israeli airstrike. You read the BBC, the Washington Post, whatever, they all say he just mysteriously died. And of course, that use of the passive voice is the classic way in which big media outlets, which are connected to the US national security state and the powers that be in Washington more generally, like to whitewash Israeli crimes and manufacture ongoing consent for this slaughter, which appears not to have any end in sight, unfortunately.
Abby, you've been somebody who not only has like an audience that are anti-war, but you've also been able to kind of break through propaganda mechanisms, I guess you could say, to people who are what we would call like establishment liberals. I just saw you on the Tim Dillon show, which by the way was incredible. But yeah, I would say that many of his viewers would probably disagree with the coverage that we do, right? But you were able to get on that show and really reach a wider range of audience that maybe see Israel as like a victim in the Middle East. And I think something that I've been but something that I really truly believe that plays a role in this is Islamophobia. Because the majority of the victims of Israel's war against Gaza are Muslim, it's easier to dehumanize them. And so people on the more like, the people who like don't trust government, who might find themselves to be practicing Christians, but they just don't trust government, but they might say they're anti-war, but if you actually look at their politics when it comes to like war in the Middle East, they'll still say really Islamophobic and dehumanizing things like, well, they've been killing each other for thousands of years. Or, well, because the Muslim faith teaches them that. And I'm saying this because I know a lot of Tim Dillon's, I'm just using this as an example, by the way, maybe some of his audience members or people in the kind of libertarian kind of ideology, sometimes they can have that perspective. What has been your experience like breaking through to people like that crowd who do have that kind of brainwashed mentality about what Hamas is, for example, or what Muslims are or Palestinians, that they kind of deserve what has come to them and that Israel is a victim in the Middle East?
Well, I think, the anti-Muslim racism steeps deep in this society, and it's not just 9/11. The racist, terrorist Arab has been a dehumanizing trope that's been in like American culture for decades, if not the last century. This goes back to the clash of civilizations and beyond. I think that today, well-intentioned liberals who may be Zionist and people like Joe Rogan and his audience, I think that, look, they look at the media coverage of this that does such a horrific, egregiously one-sided job. And it's like, if you're not diving into this and really unpacking what is going on there, it's easy to kind of take away a cursory understanding of the region and just say, oh, it's just two sides that are warring over religion. Oh, I guess both of them just want land. They do take away and say it's just too complicated. And then, of course, all the anti-Muslim hysteria and bigotry that's so deep-seated in this country, it's, that doesn't help, right? To say, look, it's people like Sam Harris. I mean, this is a guy who calls himself a progressive liberal, or not progressive, but like one of these classical liberals, right? like the Tim Pools. But yeah, he is very, very racist and Islamophobic and claims that Islam is a death cult and that people in Gaza celebrate death and just really dehumanizing stuff. But I think that the majority of people who don't really dive into this stuff would be shocked to learn the truth. And that's where, people like us come in, where you just kind of reveal very simple truths about the situation that you cannot argue with, that really does call into question everything else. Like, for example, it's not a war between regions or religion. It's actually just a country that was built on top of another people, and its foundation is ethnic cleansing of the indigenous habitants, and that's been going on for 75 years. So when we have ceremonial land back and land acknowledgement here with the Democrats and all these liberals before anything happens, I realize that that's like a trend that's continuing. It's astounding to me that we can recognize something like that, as well as Indigenous Peoples Day, and how problematic all these things are, while we are witnessing a live stream of violent, bloody conquest, real time, happening across the world. I mean, this is something that's been ongoing for 75 years. And the genocide that happened here is horrific. It happened hundreds of years ago. If it were happening right now in front of me, of course I would oppose it. So I think that people, once they realize, oh, wait, these are people who are trapped in this open air prison. They can't go anywhere. You're closing them off from actual food and water. And you have a shoot to kill order if they try to wander too close to this artificial border fence that you've propped up to deny them from the lands that they are from. Any person would realize how messed up that is.
Yeah.
And no matter what the context of the situation is, right now, Israel's openly committing genocide. That's the biggest, most egregious crime against humanity that a country can commit. And so, like, all of the other pontification, all the tone policing about pro-Palestine demonstrations and the language that's being used, it's like, yeah, we can argue all day about context, about this, about language, but right now Israel's committing genocide. And they already were committing the crime of apartheid, which is another egregious crime against humanity. And that's been happening for decades. And it took decades for all these human rights organizations to catch up. So when you make people realize that people in Gaza are trapped and they can't leave, it's the only enclave in the world that people are trapped and being not indiscriminately bombed. You mentioned, I mean, there's indiscriminate bombing, there's carpet bombing, but there's also direct targeted bombing and direct assassinations of basically the best and brightest in Gazan society, because they want to completely eradicate any chance of any human survival after this is over. And I would say they've already done a pretty good job of doing that. But I would say in the propaganda out there, people are learning more and more. It's really unfortunate that it has to take a massacre of this magnitude for people to wake up. But I think every day, more and more people are realizing, hey, this cannot be true, what I'm being told, because my eyes are telling me something else. And they're telling us, don't believe your lying eyes.
Well, and I was just going to say, one of the best things that came out of this, unfortunately, it took a massacre, it took a genocide, is that more and more people who would normally maybe believe what the New York Times is saying or CNN is saying, or maybe their politicians are saying, or maybe what their church is saying, they are now waking up to the truth of the reality, because their eyes are seeing the images coming out of Gaza. It's like, we keep hearing this is a war between Israel and Hamas. It's like, we have yet to see Hamas fighters being killed. All we're seeing are these women and children and these men coming out with wearing their flip-flops and their sandals and their sleepwear. Those are the people who are being killed. It's innocent families who are being killed. And so there's like a very big disconnect from what politicians are telling us and the images that are coming out of Gaza. And that has played a role in, pulling at the heartstrings of people around the world. Like, yes, Israel is a nuclear power, and it's being armed by the largest nuclear power. And it is using very sophisticated weaponry. It's trying to create this perception that it's winning the war. But in reality, on a global scale, it's Palestinians who are winning the hearts and minds of humanity, because, this is literal death and destruction right in front of our eyes. Just to go on the point about like celebrating Indigenous Day, for example, or not celebrating, but like, for Indigenous Day, remembering like the genocides that have happened behind us. Someone recently stated, and I thought this was really powerful, is that Indigenous people are not celebrated until they're genocided. And that's what we're seeing right now, is that, what will it take, or how long will it take for the world to recognize, and these Western leaders to recognize, that this is not okay? And so we do have IDF soldiers celebrating every single day, releasing these really just disturbing videos of themselves dancing in front of the camera while they're looting places in Gaza. And I just have one video. I mean, it's a video of a proposal, actually. So let me just show this one. I got it, 1 second. And Alan and Abby, both of you guys, please do comment on just some of these videos that we're seeing coming out of the IDF's TikTok pages. How romantic.
Yeah, sure. So,
Yeah.
Well, give this-
Just like that psycho who wrote "Will You Marry Me" like in a bombed out home,
Exactly. And
So romantic.
Yeah. Alan.
I hope she said yes.
well, yeah, this video I thought was pretty extraordinary. It shows a male IDF soldier proposing to his female IDF soldier girlfriend in front of a school which has just been bombed out and destroyed. Who knows if there are children in there? There might be limbs, whatever. He went on to say, apparently, according to the tweet, that we will build a home here, which is a very telling statement because they're actually in Gaza, right? Which is supposedly part of Palestine, and Israel supposedly doesn't want to actually occupy this place permanently. But when you actually listen to IDF soldiers or Israeli politicians, out of their mouths come real truths about what they're actually doing. And when people show you who they are, you got to believe them. And so when they're talking about building a new society on Gaza, turning it into a beachfront water park paradise, you got to believe them, because this is absolutely what they're trying to do here. And for so many reasons, I find that video particularly gruesome. But the fact that really all of these people there are sitting about and celebrating bombing a school just really goes to show you how far gone some in Israeli society are. I mean, Abby earlier was saying how the Israeli people are actually fully in support of this. Unfortunately, she's right. There was a poll that was done recently that showed that only 1.8% of Israelis think that the military has gone too far in responding to the Al-Aqsa flood Hamas attack on October 7th. And I think that really just shows you how out of line with the world's opinion and basic public decency so many in Israel are right now.
I mean, it's completely appalling to see videos emerge like this, and it kind of just makes me think about the duality and the disturbing kind of dystopian nature of this overlap of sheer medieval barbarism with like the high technology and the ability to see things real time, and especially like the high tech precision weaponry that's just leveling and completely obliterating Gaza. But like it goes both ways, this kind of weird duality that's like very schizophrenic. Like on one hand, you have Palestinians dictating their reality. And this is, of course, what's made Israel lose footing with the monopolization of the narrative for the last several decades. But like with the advancement of social media, Palestinians are just like, here, this is what's happening, especially when you have government officials denying them that agency and saying, no, this is either Pallywood propaganda, or the death count isn't real, or no, Israel's not targeting civilians. So Palestinians have to show their most vulnerable moments so the West can actually see the sheer barbarism of what's taking place. But on the flip side, you have Israeli soldiers gleefully looting and doing these horrific things on the ground proudly and gleefully, and they are filming themselves. They're posting photos, ransacking businesses that probably took an entire lifetime for Palestinians on the ground in Gaza to accumulate these goods, cherished, homes, personal belongings, in women, women's garments, mocking Arab women as they're looting their destroyed, bombed out homes, probably, like Alan said, with blood and limbless bodies strewn on the street. The level of cognitive dissonance and just horrific indoctrination and dehumanization of Arabs that makes this behavior normalized I mean, it's cradle to grave. The indoctrination of the hatred of Arabs in Israeli society, that is necessary to employ a settler colonial state that is actively ethnically cleansing indigenous people constantly. So it's really, really hard to fathom and wrap your mind around how these things could be taking place. Like I saw people saying, you know, I've studied genocides. I've studied this kind of horrific behavior of Nazis and other genocides in the past, and I never really was able to put pictures or like images to the horrific atrocities that I read and studied about. And now finally we're seeing it.
It's crazy. I was just in Palestine for the first time in 20 years this past summer, and I actually sat down with Israelis, and they are completely brainwashed. They believe that the apartheid wall is a security fence. They believe all of the checkpoints are absolutely necessary to keep terrorists out. And I asked them, who are terrorists? And they said Palestinians. I mean, they believe that every single Palestinian has the capability of going into Israel and murdering all of Israelis. And it is cognitive dissonance, because like, who is killing who? Who is occupying who? It's like the whole script is completely flipped upside down. And these are the most racist kind of people that have been trained from childhood. And I actually sat with an Israeli and I thought maybe I can like get him to turn around. You know what I mean? It's like, you can't. These people are really, really brainwashed from childhood. And so the only way that Israel can turn around from all of this, where, you know, all people can be treated with equal rights, is a one-state solution. But of course, Israel won't allow for a one-state solution. And for Israel to be held accountable for what it has done. That's the only way, because the way Israel is acting is like this child on a tantrum who just gets whatever it wants, except it's not just a child, it's a nuclear power being given the most sophisticated weaponry to genocide an entire population. And it hurts. You know, I've had so many emotional breakdowns. Abby, I told you just, you know, I'm Palestinian American, and it's been so hard watching this unfold on TV, especially because I was just there. Like literally I had gotten back to the US about like a month and a half to 2 months right before this happened. And I'm sure I know that you went to the West Bank, Abby, but when I went to the West Bank this time, you know, I had a different perspective because now I'm much older than I was. Like last time I was in Palestine, I was 18 years old. Now I'm 36. And I went there with kind of a new perspective. Before, it was like terrifying, you know, like the Israeli occupation and apartheid is really, really scary. You see the drones, you see the cameras everywhere, you see the apartheid wall, you see the military walking around, you know, pointing their guns. For some odd reason, this time around, I saw a very, very fragile, how do I say it? Like a society, like an Israeli society on the brink of breaking down.
Mm-hmm.
Like as scary as these images of the Israeli occupation is, it just looked like all of the checkpoints were run by teenagers.
Yeah. Yeah.
They were run by teenagers.
Yeah. Like teenagers from like Palo Alto just sitting there sleeping on the job.
And they're just being empowered by the US. I mean, that's the only reason why this occupation exists. But if Palestinians were not they're so intimidated every single day. But if you know, Palestinians were to just stand up to this occupation, I mean, it's terrifying. It's like this, you know, they could just, the occupation.
It's a paper tiger. And
yes.
It is like a last gasp of the apartheid regime to employ such horrific dehumanizing tactics, because they know that they have lost, right? They have no morality. You can't depend and rely on the morality of a colonial occupation. The only way that they are still standing is the United States of America.
That's right.
The rest of the world has completely abandoned them. They see Israel for exactly what it is. This latest genocidal onslaught has completely ripped the mask off forever. At this point, you know, I mentioned well-intentioned liberals before and the need to like break through this propaganda. Look, at this point, if you haven't gone on board with reality at this point, you're racist. I mean, you have to be Islamophobic at this point.
And that's what I was trying to say. Yeah. That's what I was trying to say about when you went on to the Tim Dillon show. It's like, if you're not on board now, it has to be racism. It has to be. There's no other, and I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that was the point that I was also trying to make.
No, and the tactics and policies that Israel had, the apartheid wall, the military occupation, the siege of Gaza, because they know that they can't win, they can't do things humanely, democratically, so they have to do this kind of they have to deploy these kind of barbaric practices, and that will never win in history, right? You're not going to survive because you can't unless you keep digging your heels into what's wrong. And once the US stops backing them unconditionally, that's not going to last. And so, yeah, I think you're right. I think that we're seeing not only the last gasp and a lot of like desperate measures, and that's why they're going so hard, because they're trying to just do as much as they can while the US is backing them. But after this is over, whatever is going to happen, they're not going to be able to keep going. And I think that we're seeing the beginning of the end for Israeli apartheid and Israeli occupation.
I agree. And Abby, I know that there's a chance that you might have to leave us a little bit early. So I wanted to ask you quickly about the team that you worked with in Gaza. You mentioned, we've reported on how Israel is targeting Gaza's brightest and best and most educated people in the Strip. And you've worked with some of those people yourself on the documentary Gaza Fights for Freedom. So talk to me about your communication with some of the people in Gaza that you've worked with that have been, I think some of them have been killed.
I mean, when we did Gaza Fights for Freedom back in 2019, I felt like it was such a significant movie because it just completely incontrovertibly documented war crime after war crime after war crime. Hundreds, if not thousands, because all of these were direct targeting with Israeli snipers to civilians that were just doing nothing but peacefully marching. The organizer of the march, Ahmed Artema, he's my friend. We're in regular contact. He is an incredibly sweet poet who is just a very good guy. He has nothing to do with Hamas, nor does anyone that we worked with in the documentary have anything to do with Hamas. His house was targeted and bombed. 5 members of his family were killed, including his 10-year-old son. And he's sitting in the last remaining hospital that still has a generator somehow with second-degree burns. And it's gotten to the point where I don't even know what to say to my friends there, because what do you say? Here I am sitting in the comfort and the privilege of my home with my children, and my friend just lost his 10-year-old son and he's sitting in the hospital. And it's like, I don't even know how to like touch base with him and just be like, how are you doing? Like, what can we do? You know, and the guilt is so overwhelming, the guilt of just being safe and knowing that my friends could die at any moment, and checking in with them every day, thinking that I don't know if they're going to be dead or alive. And he just said, just keep protesting. Yeah. You have to keep protesting. Stay in the streets as long as you can. My other friend, who's a photojournalist, an incredible videographer, he has been rendered homeless twice. His 2 brothers have been killed. He was terrified to retrieve the bodies from the north to be able to properly bury them because of the snipers that were perched up shooting civilians. He finally did get his brother's body and he was able to bury them. He sent me photos of his bombed out home and just said, all of my dreams for my children gone in a scream. And like just sitting there looking at this, it's like, yeah, we talk about the dead and the wounded and all of the amputees, but just the homes, because we know people can't rebuild there. They don't allow proper construction equipment. That's why so many people are being wiped out at a time, because you have to build up. You can't build out. And so just that notion of losing everything you've ever known, everything, every morsel of like personal belongings, every collection, everything that you have of value from your grandparents, their grandparents, everything's gone. And everything that you set aside for a future for your children is gone. And he showed me a video standing in that bombed out house that once was his house, that's now just a pile of rubble. And it looked like a nuclear bomb hit.
Yeah.
And I was just like, what kind of bombs are they using? Like, there is not one shred of anything left in this house. Where did it go? It just pulverized into dust. And how many people are buried under this rubble? And he just showed me, he's like, it's horrific. It does feel like a nuclear bomb. He's like, my entire life is just gone. And then my other, I mean, it just doesn't end, right? Because everyone there has been impacted and everyone there has lost people. My other friend who wants to remain anonymous because, of course, they're targeting and killing all the journalists. And that's why he's giving me his messages to post anonymously. Rendered homeless 3 times, sleeping under rubble and now under tarps. Luckily, they found one remaining tarp that has, I mean, they're barely eating anything. Now the water is all poisoned. They're barely eating like a piece of bread every couple days. But he just said, Abby, the winter is coming. The rain is here. And we all saw photos of that apocalyptic nightmare of people wading through feet of water, holding bodies of deceased children wrapped in tarps. I mean, humanity's dead. So yeah, I mean, looking at all the people that were involved in the documentary, it's so stunning. It's so stunning because back when we made it then, you know, all these past bombing campaigns that Israel's done in Gaza, it's been easy kind of to have plausible deniability. Oh, we're targeting Hamas and civilian casualties happen. Oh, it's collateral damage because we're getting Hamas because they shot rockets and this and that. And it's always been obfuscated and always obscured by the corporate media. The Great March of Return was different. Yeah. People were targeted and executed by snipers, protected categories under the Geneva Conventions, journalists, disabled people, and medics. And we thought, wow, if people watch this, then surely they'll know, right? Surely they'll know the true nature of what's going on. Surely they'll know the barbarism and the sadism that Israeli soldiers have by targeting peaceful protesters and taking them out. And there was this UN report that conclusively said this, right? And we based the whole film around this UN report, but it didn't matter. It didn't matter. And now everything's exposed for all the world to see. And, you know, 213 people were killed, mowed down by Israeli snipers during the Great March, thousands injured by ammunition, exploding bullets, hundreds left amputees. But now that many people are being taken out in single airstrikes. Every day, it's a massacre of that magnitude. So it's really hard. Like Alan said, I mean, it's beyond sick. It's beyond words. It's beyond description. The horrors that we've allowed collectively and have normalized to this extent.
It's been very difficult to see what is happening in Gaza. I mean, Mu'taz Azaiza, I don't know if you know this, Abby, but he was our producer for our documentary out of Gaza also a year and a half ago. And he was actually supposed to do reporting for us out of Gaza. And then his Instagram just blew up. And he's like, listen, I'm going to be a target. I can't report for anybody. I have to just stay independent and just not even independent. Just like, I just have to document this on my Instagram and my Twitter for the world to see. And every single day we're watching Mu'taz, our friend, you know, and his family has been killed. Many of his family members have been killed. Israel actually just targeted his neighborhood where his grandmother lives. He's lost so many friends. I mean, and of course, this is everybody's story in Gaza. And we talk about the dead, but it's like, can you imagine being alive still after having witnessed all of this? Having lost so many people in your family? I mean, this is like psychological warfare. I mean, the amount of trauma. I mean, I lived under Israeli occupation for 4 years and I had trauma and I did not live in Gaza. I can't imagine the trauma that they are experiencing every single day and the trauma that they're going to have to carry for the next generation of their children. And the things that they have witnessed are so horrifying. And yet we have people like Netanyahu, who yesterday in an interview said, you know, with international support or not, this war will continue and we're going to continue to bomb Gaza and we're going to wipe everybody there. Like, okay. And so I think at this point, I've said this time and time again, and your friend in Gaza is right, is we do have to shut it down. I mean, we're at the point now where like, we can't just...
We have to escalate.
We have to escalate our protesting and we have to use whatever skill set we have to push this forward and to shut it down by, there's like Palestine Action, for example, in the UK. They're going to the literal arms factories. They're going directly to the source of like Elbit Systems and the weapons manufacturers, and they're shutting them down. And they've cost Israel billions of dollars by doing that. We have to keep going into the halls of Congress and the senator's office, and we need to let them know who they represent. They have Israeli flags outside of their offices. I mean, Code Pink just did a video showing like we are in the, look at all these senators with an Israeli flag outside of their office. And how is that okay? That shows who they are representing. They're not representing the interests of the people. They're representing the interests of a foreign government. Did you guys want to add anything to my commentary? I just feel so exhausted.
I just want to call out John Fetterman. Like, what a monster this dude is. Can you imagine?
He turned out to be a monster, yeah.
What is like? I mean, yeah. I mean, the dual loyalty, the BDS laws, the policing on college campuses, the threats that are going around to people who are just protesting and solidarity for Palestine. It is monstrous. It's monstrous. And, it's not just journalists that they're targeting universities. They're targeting the staff of the hospitals. Our dear friend, Rifat Al-Arir, this was just a viral poet who was beloved in Gaza and beloved in the West. He was on Electronic Intifada all the time. He was such a great guy. And let's not forget what happened. I mean, he was targeted. He was actually threatened by Israeli forces saying, "We are going to kill you." He had to leave the shelter that he was at and go stay with his sister because he was scared to endanger the lives of the people who were surrounding him in the shelter. And they targeted just that level of the apartment building, specifically in a precision strike, to kill him and to kill his sister and her children as well. And it all kind of goes back to what, everyone trying to rationalize this horrific war crime that killed children because of a joke he made on Twitter. And let's go back to Bari Weiss, this so-called free speech advocate who has spent her entire career grifting off the notion that she's some free speech warrior, while meanwhile, all she's done is try to target and take down pro-Palestine academics and students. That's like her claim to fame. She had the audacity to call out Rafid and say, he's joking about burning an Israeli child in an oven. Okay, he was joking about it because it was such a disgusting fake propaganda story that was put out by Israelis. Actually, every accusation is a confession. There was actually a Palestinian who claimed that Israeli soldiers did that to him back during one of the many massacres in the 80s, if I'm not mistaken. So every accusation is a confession, and that's why Rafid just understandably mocked the idea of, Palestinian fighters and militants threw an Israeli baby in an oven. We know that that's not true. We know it's laughably false. And you have to kind of sit back and laugh at how disturbing and depraved the levels of propaganda that they're trying to throw out there to take away from the open genocide that they are committing and that they plan to commit. And all of the barbaric, inhumane policies that precipitated October 7th. So he was rightfully mocking something that was egregiously false and being used to dehumanize and justify genocide. And so Bari Weiss calls him out and is just like, this man is mocking the fact that an Israeli child was thrown into an oven. She has not taken down the tweet. She has not retracted such a ridiculous claim. And she basically put a target on the back of this man. And he showed the dozens of death threats that he got. And he said, if I die, blame Bari Weiss and her ilk. And I'll take that to heart, to my grave. Because Bari Weiss and her cohorts and all of the people who are disgusting genocidal Zionists who dehumanize Palestinians and put targets on their back, they are responsible. Their rhetoric has consequences. And this is what rhetoric like this does. Because fanatic Israeli soldiers are gleeful about taking out the best and brightest. And when someone's a viral voice on social media that's uprooting or disturbing the narrative that they want to put out, this is their chance under the cover of this war to just go and kill anyone, any political dissident. And that's exactly what they're doing. And we should never let Barry Weiss forget it, because she's in Manhattan, sitting there in her privilege, drinking lattes, and she'll never think about Rafit again. And we can't ever let her forget what she did.
And Alan, can you talk to us a little bit about the ADL? Because the Anti-Defamation League has done similar things like what Barry Wise has done towards Palestinian activists. They've worked to dehumanize so many people in the pro-Palestine movement. They've historically spied on anti-apartheid activists, Desmond Tutu, the African National Congress. I mean, the FBI at one point said that the ADL needs to register as a foreign agent for the state of Israel because it was providing intelligence directly to Israel's Mossad. You just came out with a report talking about all these new anti-Semitism claims. So
That's right.
about their new report and just the ADL and people like Barry Wise, like this establishment, so-called liberal Zionists movement that we have that's conquered our narratives of Palestine.
It really is extraordinary how many of these reactionary American Zionists there are that really rebranded themselves in the 2010s as the intellectual dark web, these free speech warriors. I'm thinking about people like Dave Rubin, who always talked about him being Mr. Free Speech, but then suddenly when France decided it was going to ban Palestinian protests, he says, oh, well, maybe France is finding a way out of its darkness. This is the way forward. He was so gleeful about the idea of just straight up banning an entire protest movement, which completely undermines him. People like Sam Harris and all these other ghouls are equally as disgusting when it comes to their support for silencing of Palestinian voices. And many of them support the Anti-Defamation League, which is a long-time organization which purports to be an anti-racist group that catalogs instances of racism and then fights against them. Perhaps the most important, most headlining, grabbing thing that ADL has done in the past couple of years is they've just released a report saying that anti-Semitic incidents in the United States have risen by 337%, so a gigantic increase in anti-Semitic incidents. And we're seeing politicians from the left and right of the mainstream in the United States citing this all the time. It's on the front pages of the big newspapers. It's leading news bulletins on cable news. But when you actually look at the data, some things really come up that are just extraordinary. For example, when you actually look at the 2,000 or so anti-Semitic incidents that the ADL have logged in the last couple of months, they find that more than 900 of them are protest marches calling for ceasefires and showing solidarity with Palestine. Because for the ADL, anti-Zionism isn't just anti-Semitism. Jonathan Greenblatt, the ADL's chief, actually said anti-Zionism is genocide. And that's a direct quote of what he said on MSNBC recently. And so, of course, whenever Israel carries out a new round of death and destruction against its neighbors, there is going to be a rise in quote-unquote anti-Semitic incidents because, as the ADL completely and openly say, they say anything that's against the state of Israel or against Zionism more generally is by its inherent nature anti-Semitic. And so this really serves as a way of deflecting the blame away from Israel and changing the conversation away from genocide and apartheid and towards anti-Semitic incidents. So you see so many people coming out, somehow getting the ability to speak to on cable news or the ability to write big, long think pieces in our establishment journals and our establishment newspapers saying that they don't feel safe on campus anymore because, somebody shouted ceasefire at them. Probably one of the many progressive Jewish groups who are doing such good work right now to protest what's going on. But this isn't the first time the ADL has really carried water for the Israeli government. In fact, as you said, Manar, in the late 60s, the FBI, an internal memo showed that the FBI assumed that the ADL was actually working hand in glove with the state of Israel and was in fact they thought that the organization was actually paid for by the Israeli government as well. And the ADL has, for so many decades now, in the United States really acted as a real reactionary force in politics. It supported the WHO Act, the House on Un-American Activities Commission. It spied on the entire New Left from Dr. Martin Luther King all the way to groups like Greenpeace, the Gay and Lesbian Liberation Movement, spied on the ANC and sent that information to the apartheid government of South Africa. It also shared documents with the Israeli government as well. And so this group, which is, oh yeah, and I should also say, obviously spying on all the progressive Jewish organizations as well. And so this group has really acted as an unofficial private surveillance organization on behalf of both the US government and the Israeli government for quite some time. And so I don't find it surprising at all that yet again it's trying to change the subject from the slaughter that's going on in Gaza and to try to make this about any criticism of Israel is anti-Semitism. And worryingly, the ADL is also ensconcing itself into big social media networks like Facebook, like TikTok, like Google, acting as advisors on their posts. So the ADL is basically, in some ways, having a direct influence on what billions of people see and don't see in their news feeds because they are now working with these big organizations. And you started the show, Manar, talking about how TikTok and how Instagram and all these big social media organizations are taking away posts showing the Palestinian perspective. There is an element of that which is directed by the Anti-Defamation League. And so we're getting to the point where social media might come almost as controlled as corporate media. And then we're going to be in a terrible position.
And the ADL currently trains police forces across this country, and it also works directly with the FBI. You know, the FBI once wanted it to register and was critical of the ADL, but now they work hand in hand and they advise the FBI. But none of it is surprising because now the ADL is on an advisory board for YouTube, for Google, and they have been responsible for the removal of thousands of Palestinian posts on those platforms. So. Abby, I know you have to go soon, but if you could end with the atrocity propaganda. We have, the whole incursion of Gaza was based on lies. One of them was the 40 beheaded baby story, in which Joe Biden himself said that he saw photos of this, and his handlers at the White House had to retract that statement. The Israeli military itself has come out and said that they cannot provide evidence of this. And so talking about the atrocity propaganda and just history of, just these kinds of lies that have been fomented to justify wars.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's been atrocity propaganda that's precipitated October 7th to justify the perpetual military occupation and medieval siege of Gaza. And, this is nothing new. But yes, I mean, October 7th, it was a national tragedy for Israel. I'm not going to sit here and give an obligatory condemnation of Hamas because I will condemn the only thing that makes sense to condemn, which is the root of the violence, which is the occupation and the siege. It is non-negotiable to give people basic human rights. And when you deny people basic human rights, there will be violence and there will be bloodshed. That is just an inevitability, especially when you make peaceful resistance impossible, which they so clearly have. But the actual depraved levels of propaganda that was uncritically repeated by Western media and just lapped up by Western audiences, it was frankly cartoonish. Because, at first I didn't have any reason to question the fact that civilians were killed en masse at the Nova Festival. I was alarmed and surprised to find out later that a lot of civilians were actually killed by Israeli forces themselves that indiscriminately fired into the kibbutzes and actually bombed several homes. I mean, you look at the firebombing, or you look at the bombed out cars that they're now burying to get rid of the evidence. It looks like the highway of death during the Gulf War when U.S. forces retreated and there was just like hundreds of bombed out cars with charred corpses inside. That is what Israeli soldiers did. That is what Apache helicopters do. So how many people actually were killed by their own military personnel? That's my first question. How many armed settlers were killed? These are questions that we still do not have answers for. I really hope that there is an investigation into October 7th to determine what really did happen. But yes, I mean, the depraved levels of propaganda to dehumanize Arabs and Palestinians and try to conflate Hamas with ISIS, planting the ISIS flag in the ruins of some of these homes. It's despicable. It's despicable, the fact that Western journalists looking at an institution as, I mean, as much as the Israeli military lies, they are the least credible institution that you should be looking at for anything related to anything that's going on with this conflict. So the fact that their press releases were uncritically taken by Western media and just printed, as in any other thing that erupts there, it was comical. The 40 beheaded babies said by a fanatical settler and touted across every major newspaper around the world. Once a lie like that is cemented, there's no taking it back, right? I mean, people still say that all day, every day. They behead babies and they have mass rape of the women, as if all the militants went over there and just planned on doing mass rape and beheading infants. I mean, it's totally insane. I'm open to the fact that rape happened. The thing is, I have not seen evidence to prove that fact. So when you're talking about mass rape and you have no evidence to document it, extraordinary claims require evidence. So those two things were never proven. And even when you have UN investigators asking for proof, they are told that they are anti-Semitic. You have think piece after think piece really trying to push this now, because 6 weeks, 7 weeks after the genocidal onslaught begins, they need to keep bringing people back to October 7th because they've lost the world, right? And you see this global movement erupting. And so they need to keep bringing people back. That's why you have these IDF propaganda videos that are cut and edited, that actually, when journalists that have to be invited to these screenings because these videos aren't released to the widespread public or media for some reason, they sit down and they are told, you are about to see footage of child mutilation in these videos. And they see nothing of the sort. Yes, there are horrible things that happen on those cameras. A grenade is thrown into like a shelter and a kid, I think the child either loses his hearing or is permanently deaf, something like that. And I think that that's what they're alleging is child mutilation. I mean, it's so beyond the pale, and it's so like twisted and contorted, the truth versus the lies that they keep trying to put out there. They keep trying to say, oh no, this is what happened. Meanwhile, what they're saying Hamas did, they are doing every single day. What do you think bombs do? They're ripping apart infants' bodies. There was just reports of mass executions of infants. Infants. Where's the news on that? Where's the coverage? Where's the hundreds of headlines around the world about Israeli invading soldiers killing babies? Not only just leaving babies to die in the NICU, actual mass executions of children. This is happening, yet all we hear from our Western media and our disgusting, complicit Western leaders is that Hamas not only has genocidal intent, but committed these heinous, barbaric acts, and they need to be wiped out. Meanwhile, genocide is unfolding. The heinous acts that we see are unfolding every single day, and I feel like I'm losing my mind that we just continue to be told one thing while we see another, and the world idly sits back. And I don't know how much you have to see. I don't know how many dead babies you need to see to have basic humanity, but I'm just praying for the violence to stop and all of this to end, because I don't know how much more the world can take. I don't know how much more Gaza can take.
I don't know either. But this brings me back to, we'll wrap up with this, with Piers Morgan, because, he's a really good example of, I don't know if we could call him a gatekeeper or what, but, he, on his show, purports to care about all lives. And yet every single episode, he starts with, do you condemn Hamas, right?
Hamas.
Do you condemn
Hamas.
But not just that. He'll kind of corner his guests to condemn Hamas and the barbaric events of October 7th, because he is still pushing that atrocity propaganda of the 40 beheaded babies. I think Abby had to go for her own baby, but and then he will and then when his guests challenge him on this, okay, Piers, let's say 40 babies did die on October 7th. What do you call the mass execution of babies in Gaza? And he will not call that barbaric. Oh, well, yeah, that's really horrific, but Israel has a right to defend itself, so I just don't know what to say about that. I mean, it's really disgusting. And now today, I don't know, Alan, if you saw this, but Piers Morgan has, it's come out and it's been shown that he hacked his employees' phones and computers. Did you see that story?
No, I did not, but it doesn't really surprise me. Piers Morgan has always been a bit of a scumbag, honestly.
Yeah.
He's had a very long history in the media. I will say that he was one of the few journalists who really questioned the UK-US invasion of Iraq back in 2003. And he did, of course, have Loki on Mid-Press's Loki for an interview. But having said that, I think he is really just somebody who is chasing ratings so often. I don't think he was doing that because he wanted to show the other side and want to have like a free and open discussion. Because, frankly, I wouldn't trust him as far as I could throw him.
Well, what's really just, I mean, I know we have to both go, but, just Piers Morgan is just one of those individuals. I mean, here's the thing, is in the US, we don't have as much Palestinian and pro-Palestine voices on corporate media. So I will have to say, if we can give him one thing, is it is true that he does allow those voices way more than, for example, in the United States. But the US is just is a much larger country, and like the media can control who cannot have on its programs, whereas the UK is a much small, like London and Great Britain, or Great Britain is such a small country that the majority of its population, like they have so much diversity that they're kind of pressured into having this diversity on these programs. But it still is within the framework of pushing that pro-Israel propaganda. I don't know if I explained that correctly, but yeah.
Yeah, but in Great Britain, we've seen gigantic protests. Millions of people have been on the streets calling for a ceasefire, calling for Palestine to be free. There was even a march in London which drew 1 million people out on the day, despite the fact that the government explicitly told them, everybody, not to go out on that march because it was happening on the same day as what Americans call Veterans Day, and that's a very big deal in the UK. Remembrance Sunday, it's called, and they said it would be basically like an affront to all of those who died to call for a ceasefire on Armistice Day, as we call it here, which is quite a hot take, frankly, considering that the whole point of Armistice Day is to remember the fallen of the dead and to make sure that war never happens again. But yeah, there's a very diverse coalition of people in the United Kingdom and indeed across Europe who are continuing to protest every week, getting out. Seems like it doesn't matter if the cold and the wet can't really dampen their spirits. And so what Abby's friend in Gaza said about keep protesting, it seems people in Europe are taking that to heart.
And that's what we all need to continue to do. Anyways, I know Abby had to go a little bit early, but thank you, Alan, for joining us. And thank you, everybody, for watching and joining the live stream. And we will catch you all another time. Bye-bye.
See ya.